Last time we spoke about the January 28th incident. In January of 1932, tensions escalated in Shanghai as anti-Japanese sentiment surged after Japan's invasion of Manchuria. Orchestrated by Yoshiko Kawashima, a Japanese spy, a provocation led to violence, sparking outrage amongst the Japanese expatriates. Japan demanded apologies and compensation from China, threatening military action if their demands were not met. As the Japanese military amassed forces in Shanghai, the Chinese 19th Route Army prepared to resist, igniting the conflict known as the January 28th incident, marking the beginning of a fierce struggle for control. Amidst all the chaos, the Nanjing government struggled to respond to Japan's escalating aggression in Shanghai. Chiang Kai-shek prioritized avoiding war, urging a diplomatic approach to protect Shanghai's economy. Despite pressure, the 19th Route Army was ordered to withdraw, but tensions flared when Japan attacked the Chinese garrison. The 19th Route Army fiercely resisted, leading to intense battles. As Japan sent reinforcements, Chiang Kai-shek faced mounting protests and criticism for his passive stance, questioning whether he could maintain his strategy over the encroaching enemy. This episode is the First Battle of Shanghai, 1932. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia. Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I just released a very long format documentary titled The War for Asia. It covers the Boxer Rebellion and the Russo-Japanese War. And over on Echoes of War, we just released another episode covering a Napoleonic-era battle, that being the Battle of Austerlitz. If you'd like to further support me, please go check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. And the latest episode over there is actually a first part in a multi-part series about an alternate history of the Pacific War. The first episode is titled The Great Naval Battle of Pearl Harbor, and I really do recommend it. Go give it a look. In the last episode, we covered the January 28th incident. At about 11:30 p.m. on January the 28th, Japan ordered 2,300 Japanese Marines to advance westwards along every branch road on the west side of the North Sichuan Road, without waiting for a response. This road, which crosses into the northern area of the international settlement and has frequently been designated as a Japanese defense zone, includes Target Road, now known as Wujian Road, in the Hankou district of Shanghai, Guizhou Road, and Yokohama Road. Their objective was to seize the Songhu Railway defense line at Tiantong'an Station. They faced strong resistance from the 19th Route Army, further escalating the conflict. In the early hours of the 29th, Japanese aircraft launched from the Notoro seaplane carrier, which was moored over at Hongpu River, attacked the Chinese district of Jiaibei. Both the commercial press located at number 584 Baoshan Road and the Oriental Library, the largest public library in China with over 300,000 books, were completely destroyed. That same day, the 19th Route Army sent a telegram to the entire nation concerning the situation. And do forgive me, it's a rough translation. Urgent. Dear Sir and Madam, the Japanese have occupied our 3 northeastern provinces, changing the color of our territory and making our nation perish. Recently, they have killed and set fire in Shanghai, and vagrants are everywhere, doing the most despicable and violent things in the world. Gunboats are coming one after another, and the Marines are all landed. At 12 a.m. on the 28th, they openly invaded our defense lines in Jiaibei of Shanghai, and they challenged us. Guangnai and the others are soldiers, and they only know that it is their duty to defend themselves and defend their land. They cannot give up an inch of land or an inch of grass. They resist to save the country and protect the race. Even if they sacrifice only one person and one bullet, they will never retreat and lose the personality of the soldiers of the Republic of China. This thing and this ambition are exposed to the sun, and the sun are known to the world. The spirits of our ancestors in heaven are truly relying on us. On the morning of the 29th, Chiang Kai-shek met with Hu Yingqin and Zhu Pede to discuss countermeasures. Simultaneously, Zhu Pede convened a meeting with Hu Yingqin, Gu Zhutong, Li Zhusheng, Dong Shuzong, Li Wei, and some others to address issues such as defense deployment and the security of Nanjing and the Yangtze River, as well as resistance against the Japanese in general. Chiang Kai-shek established the principles going forward for negotiations with Japan, emphasizing the need to prepare for talks while actively resisting. He stated that negotiations must have a clear final line of defense and a maximum limit that would not compromise administrative and territorial integrity, undermine the spirit of the Nine-Power Treaty, or jeopardize national sovereignty. If these limits were exceeded and unacceptable concessions were made, a decisive battle would need to be fought, even at the cost of defeat and death. The defense and military strategy for Beijing and Shanghai included the 19th Route Army defending Shanghai with full strength, while the Front Guard Army consisting of the 87th and 88th Divisions would protect Nanjing. Hu Yingqin would remain in Nanjing, overseeing all party government and military personnel left behind. Chiang Kai-shek, along with the Central Political Council of the Kuomintang, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Government, and Chen Mingshi, would express their commitment to resisting Japanese aggression publicly. Chiang Kai-shek also sent a telegram to Hu Zhongjun, the director of the Hubei Province Pacification Office, and Shi Qingyao, commander of the 4th Division, stating, "Last night, the Japanese invaders attacked our 19th Route defense line in Jiabei, and the battle is ongoing. Our army is determined to fight to the death. Their naval forces in Han and Shun will likely engage in military operations. We urge you to remain vigilant and defend yourselves, never yielding to them. The 4th Division should concentrate on strict defense in Wuhan and avoid dispersal. If military funds become scarce, local governments will need to raise them independently." The National Government Military Committee appointed Chiang Kai-shek, Feng Yusung, Yan Xishan, and Zhang Shuliang as members responsible for mobilizing the army and commanding the Shanghai War. Chiang Kai-shek officially resumed power after resigning to prevent a surrender, and he committed himself to a prolonged resistance. On January the 30th, the Chinese Nationalist government announced the relocation of the capital to Luoyang. Chiang Kai-shek then sent a telegram urging resistance against the Japanese and dispatched the elite 5th Army to reinforce Shanghai. That night, Dai Jie, the commander of the Xiongnu garrison, took charge of the military operations in Shanghai, overseeing the 19th Route Army. The commander-in-chief was Zhang Gangnai and Tai Qingkai as the army commanders, and then there was the divisional commanders Xu Xianyuan, Mao Wuzhou, and Shen Guanghan. Chiang Kai-shek then sent a telegram to his troops across the nation, and again I apologize for the rough translation. "Since the Northeast incident began, the central government has been enduring humiliation and maintaining peace in order to avoid war and protect the lifeline of this country. It hopes to use justice and fairness to awaken the Japanese pirates. Unexpectedly, the more we tolerate, the more arrogant they become. When the Shanghai incident occurred, we accepted their demands with great pain, but the Japanese pirates still brazenly pressed on, repeatedly attacking our Shanghai Defense Force, bombing civilian houses, throwing bombs on the streets, and our compatriots were ravaged. The country is about to perish. Anyone with blood in their veins would rather endure it. Since the 19th Route Army has risen up to defend itself bravely, our entire army, in this time of national destruction and extinction, when the revolutionary soldiers are facing imminent danger, they should fight for the dignity of our country, strive for the survival of the nation, fulfill their responsibilities for the revolution, and be determined to die rather than live in disgrace, so as to deal with the brutal Japanese that destroy peace and despise faith and integrity. Chiang Kai-shek and his comrades have shared hardships for a long time. Although I am now in the opposition, I am willing to swear to live and die with the soldiers and fulfill my duty. I'm here to inform you that, in advance, with my blunt sincerity, I ask you to be determined and work hard. Share the same hatred with the enemy. Do not be arrogant. Maintain the spirit of sacrifice. Stay ready. Fight and save the country from danger." From that day on, the various ministries, commissions, and committees of the national government began to move to Liaoyang, but the Military Commission and Ministry of Foreign Affairs remained in Nanjing. At the same time, the frontline troops were ordered to be jointly commanded by the Minister of Military Affairs, Hu Yingqin, and the Chief of the General Staff, Zhu Peide. Typically, Chinese sources break down what is known as the First Battle of Shanghai into 3 phases. In the previous episode, we looked through the event up to the point of the first phase. After the initial fighting, both the 19th Route Army and the Japanese agreed to a ceasefire so they could strengthen their positions, and at least allow for some form of diplomacy to occur. This went into effect on the 29th, and as we had mentioned, immediately afterwards the Japanese rapidly began reinforcing their position in Shanghai. They first sent the Sasebo 26 Squadron on the 30th, bearing 474 troops of the Sasebo 3rd Special Marine Corps, alongside some supplies. The next day, aircraft carriers Kaigan Hosho came over with 30 aircraft from the 1st Air Fleet. Then the cruisers Nakayura, Abukuma, alongside 4 torpedo boats, came bearing another 2,000 Marines. On February the 1st, the Terukoku Maru brought over the Yokosuka 1st Special Marine Corps, roughly about 525 men, who would land at Hoshan Wharf. With all said and done, roughly 7,000 Japanese troops had been brought over. On February the 1st, the IJN warships began bombarding Nanjing from the Yangtze River, prompting Yu Jieshi to frantically demand Chiang Kai-shek transfer more troops to Shanghai. That night, the Japanese light cruiser Tenru and the protected cruisers Hirado and Tama and 7 ships of the Navy's 23rd Destroyer Squadron fired upon Nanjing using 4 140mm guns, 12 152mm single-mounted rapid-fire guns, 12 120mm single-mounted guns, and 20 76mm single-mounted rapid-firing guns. The rich and officials fled the city for refuge, but the Japanese army did not land any men to follow up the attack. Simultaneously, 40,000 Shanghai workers from over 20 Japanese-owned cotton mills began an anti-Japanese strike. Being heavily backed by communists, the workers began aiding the 19th Route Army to blockade the Japanese in the factories and the streets, as they sabotaged what they could. February the 2nd, the Japanese army attacked Wusong several times, but they were repelled each time. On the 3rd, the Japanese expanded their attacks against Jiaibei, Baizuqiao, and other locations, but the Chinese defenders successfully repelled these assaults pretty well. On the 4th, the Japanese launched their first major offensive, which extended the conflict to Jiangwan and Wusong. Following a day of intense fighting, the Wusong fort was destroyed by enemy bombardment. However, the Japanese army was unable to land due to determined resistance of the Chinese defenders. The anti-aircraft artillery company from the 88th Division, reassigned to the 4th Regiment of the 156th Brigade of the 19th Route Army, managed to shoot down a Japanese aircraft. After the failure of the general offensive, Yukichi Shiozawa was dismissed and sent back to Japan. Vice Admiral Yoshisaburo Nomura, the newly appointed commander of the 3rd Fleet, succeeded him. After Nomura assumed his role, the Japanese army began to bolster its forces. Japan had initially planned to deploy troops when tensions escalated in Shanghai, but the Navy had opposed this move. However, as the situation deteriorated, the Navy was compelled to seek assistance from the Army. On February the 2nd, the Japanese cabinet officially decided to send troops. In response to the urgent circumstances in Shanghai, they resolved to dispatch the Shanghai Dispatch Mixed Brigade, led by Brigadier Commander Major General Shimamoto Kuma, along with the 9th Division commanded by Lieutenant General Iyuda Kenkichi. The Shanghai Dispatch Mixed Brigade and the 2nd Independent Tank Squadron were prioritized for the transport. Concurrently, the Japanese Navy also sent the Yokosuka 2nd Special Marine Corps to Shanghai. The 24th Mixed Brigade landed in Wusong on the afternoon of February the 7th. By this time, the combined forces of the Japanese Navy and Army, alongside some of their Air Force crews, had exceeded about 10,000 personnel. At dawn on February the 8th, the Japanese Army's 24th Mixed Brigade launched an attack against Zhanghuabang, Yunzaobang, and Wusong Town along 3 routes, but they were repelled by the Chinese. Back on the 4th, the National Government Military Commission had sent out a telegram that divided the country into 4 defensive zones. The first zone, which included the areas north of the Yellow River, were assigned to Zhang Shiliang as Commander-in-Chief. The second zone, covering the area south of the Yellow River, was placed under the direct command of Chiang Kai-shek. The third zone, encompassing the area south of the Yangtze River as well as Fujian and Zhejiang provinces, was led by Hu Yingqin, and the fourth zone, which included Guangdong and Guangxi, was commanded by Chen Qitang. The telegram also stated that aside from maintaining troops for local stability, all commanders were to concentrate their forces within their respective defensive zones to confront the aggression of Japan. Additionally, a directive was issued for the provinces of Sichuan, Henan, Guizhou, Hubei, Shaanxi, and Yunnan to send troops to serve as a general reserve. I think I might take a little sidetrack here to explain something to the audience who might not understand the implications of this. In most of your minds, you would probably imagine this is an existential threat to the nation of China, so the National Army, as it were, would all get together to meet them. But you have to remember, China is still fractured. As much as we like to say the warlord era is over, it's actually not. Most of these provinces are still being governed by warlords who really owe no loyalty to the government itself. Thus, it's really difficult to get some of the interior provinces to start sending troops. From the perspective of many of these warlords controlling areas in the interior, what do they care if the Japanese are invading? It might be good for business. The only reason I state this is I often get a lot of comments on my YouTube channel about why didn't China just band together in 1931 to really meet the enemy, in Manchuria and such. And that's honestly the answer. Now, on February the 5th, upon learning that the Japanese army had been redeployed from mainland China to Shanghai, Chairman of the Military Commission Chiang Kai-shek sent a telegram from Liaoyang to Hu Yingqin. He instructed that if the Japanese forces landed, the Chinese Air Force would engage them in combat. Additionally, Chiang Kai-shek sent a message of condolence to Jiang Guangnai, Zhai Qingkai, and Dai Zhi of the 19th Round Army, stating this: "Brothers, you have been fighting valiantly for a week. Each time I reflect on the tremendous sacrifices made by the soldiers and their dedication, I feel a deep sadness. If necessary, Zhongzheng can come to lead in person. When the air forces enter the fray, the army must establish various signals in advance to communicate with them to ensure coordinated efforts." On that same day, the 88th Division arrived to Suzhou. On February the 6th, Chiang Kai-shek ordered the 261st Brigade of the 87th Division to move from Nanjing to reinforce Kunshan. The troops would reach Kunshan on February the 7th. On the 8th, Chiang Kai-shek directed Hu Yingqin to transfer an artillery battalion to support the 19th Route Army. Then on the 9th, Chiang Kai-shek mobilized the 1st Division, led by Commander Hui Zhongnan, and the 7th Division, commanded by Wang Jun, to prepare for reinforcement of the 19th Route Army. Now, February the 8th marks the second phase of the battle. On the 10th, to ensure the 88th Division of the Central Army complied with the orders from the 19th Route Army of the Guangdong Army, Chiang Kai-shek sent a telegram to Yue Jieshi, insisting that, quote, "Your troops must strictly follow the commands of the Commander-in-Chief, Chang, and coordinate with their movements with their allied forces." The Japanese Marine Corps under Yukio Shoizawa initiated a three-pronged encirclement attack on Hankow. The National Army mounted a determined defense and ultimately repelled the Japanese forces, pursuing and destroying them, which significantly lowered their morale. On the 11th, Chen Cheng, commander of the Central Army's 18th Army, sent a telegram to Chiang Kai-shek from Jian of Jiangxi, reporting that the troops had not been paid for nearly 2 months and they were lacking a lot of food. At the same time, the national government was planning to redeploy the National Army that had been engaged in suppressing the communists in Jiangxi to Zhejiang and then to Shanghai, while simultaneously relocating the entire capital to Liaoyang. On the 12th, following a battle at Taijiaoqiao, the Japanese Army's strategy to consolidate their forces was entirely disrupted. The next morning, on February the 13th, the Japanese 24th Mixed Brigade crossed the Taijiaoqiao Bridge, heading into Zhouzaobang, and engaged with the Nationalist Army. Seizing the moment, the 19th Route Army headquarters aimed to annihilate the Japanese forces decisively then. The Nationalist Army surrounded the Japanese troops near the Yong'an cotton mill. Additionally, 60 members of a suicide squad launched a suicidal attack, resulting in the complete destruction of over 1,600 Japanese soldiers. And I have to say it here, I am using a Chinese source for this episode in particular, and that little note, probably take it with a grain of salt. I very much doubt they killed 1,600 Japanese soldiers. Place those casualties more in the hundreds, if anything. The Japanese army faced significant losses, to be sure, though, thwarting their attempt to swiftly capture Wusong. On February the 14th, Chiang Kai-shek ordered the 88th and 87th Divisions, which were already stationed in Nanxiang and Kushan near Shanghai, to be organized into the 5th Army. He appointed Zhang Jizhong, a volunteer eager to fight against the Japanese, as commander of the 5th Army. This new army was placed under the unified command of the 19th Route Army and took over the defensive line stretching from the northern end of Jiangwang through Miaoxing to the western end of Wusong. It served as the left-wing army, while the 19th Route Army acted as the right wing, tasked with defending Jingwang and the area south of Dachang and the urban region of Shanghai. To replenish the 19th Road Army's losses, Chiang Kai-shek repeatedly ordered reinforcements from various locations. For instance, on the 15th, Zhang Guan Yuxiang dispatched 500 active soldiers from Bangbu to the 19th Road Army. On the 17th, Liang Gongying sent another 500 unarmed soldiers from Qingjiangpu, and on the 19th, Liu Jie contributed 1,000 active unarmed soldiers from Henan. On the 16th, Chiang Kai-shek communicated with Finance Minister Song Ji-yuan via telegram stating, "Since the Japanese refuse to withdraw their troops from Shanghai, we must resist until the very end. Food supplies in Jiangxi and Henan will dwindle, and assistance will be completely halted. Please arrange to deposit 10 million yuan to the central banknotes in Nanchang and 20 million yuan in Zhangzhou. This will allow the government to continue functioning, the army to be sustained, and perhaps we can navigate this crisis and avert collapse. This is my final request. I hope you can find a way to assist." To prevent any friction between the 5th Army and the 19th Route Army over competing for military accolades, Chiang Kai-shek sent a telegram to Zhang Zhizhong and Yue Zhishi on February the 18th stating this: "The fight against Japan is a matter of national survival, and it is not a matter of honor for an individual or a certain unit. Our frontline officers and men should fully understand this. Therefore, the honor of the 19th Route Army is the honor of our entire National Revolutionary Army. There is absolutely no distinction between honor and disgrace. The 5th Army's joining of the front line is feared by the enemy and will also be slandered by the reactionaries, those who oppose the Nanjing central government. If we can continue the fight in the name of the 19th Route Army, it will be enough to demonstrate the strength of our National Revolutionary Army. We will share life and death, let alone honor and disgrace. I hope that this will be conveyed to the officers and men of the 5th Army. They must unite and fight with our 19th Road Army and make sacrifices to complete the revolutionary mission." Over on the other side, following reports of significant losses suffered by the Japanese army in Wusong, Tokyo received an imperial decree from Emperor Hirohito demanding the Shanghai incident get settled quick. In response, Chief of Staff Zairen urgently ordered the 9th Army Division, commanded by Yuda Kenkichi, to swiftly reinforce Shanghai. By the afternoon of the 13th, the main contingent of the 9th Division had arrived at Shanghai port. By the 16th, all personnel had disembarked in Wusong. Consequently, Lieutenant General Yuda took over command from Nomura. At this point, the Japanese invading forces comprised over 30,000 troops from naval, land, and air units, along with 60 to 70 field artillery pieces, more than 60 aircraft, and a dozen of ships concentrated at the Wusong mouth. Yuda issued a statement late on the night of the 13th asserting, "If anyone obstructs our division from fulfilling its mission, we will take decisive action without hesitation." On the 18th, he sent an ultimatum to Taitsinkai demanding, "Your army must immediately cease hostilities and withdraw from the following areas by 5 p.m. on February the 20th. On the west bank of the Hongpu River, retreat from these areas connecting the western end of the concession, Chaotaidu Town, Jiaojiaqiao Town, and Pushang Town to the north. On the eastern bank, withdraw from the areas connecting Nanidu and Jiangjiaolu Town to the north. Retreat to a zone 20 kilometers away from the border of each concession. Additionally, all military installations in the specified areas must be dismantled and no new ones established. If these demands are not met, the Japanese army will have no choice but to act freely against your forces, and your army will bear all resulting consequences." In response to Ueda's ultimatum, Cao and Chang ordered the frontline troops to fire heavily on Japanese positions as a warning. On the morning of the 20th, Ueda commanded a full-scale attack across the front, employing tactics to break through the center while flanking from both sides. The 9th Division led the assault on the junction of Zhongwan and Maohang, aiming to encircle Wusong from the north, with the Kurume Brigade and Jiaibei with the Marine Corps from the south. The Japanese began with artillery bombardments, followed by infantry and tank assaults on the Jianghuabang and Yangshupu lines, both of which were successfully repelled by Chinese defenders. Over 1,000 Japanese soldiers and several tanks in Jiaibei were killed or wounded due to landmines. This, of course, is reported by the Chinese, so again, take that with a grain of salt. On the 21st, Ueda personally directed thousands of infantry supported by aircraft and artillery to attack the Chinese defensive positions. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the battle continued until dawn on the 23rd. The Japanese forces attempted to encircle Jiangwan town from Jiangwan Station, but the Chinese defenders fought valiantly, launching multiple charges and capturing Japanese Major Kong Sheng, along with hundreds of soldiers. Ultimately, the Japanese army was unable to withstand the resistance and they began to retreat. After the Japanese 9th Division arrived in Shanghai, they prepared to initiate a second major assault on the defenders of the city. The strategy involved a comprehensive attack stretching from Jiaibei to Wusong to contain the Chinese army's strength, with primary forces concentrated in Jiangwang and Maohang. The goal was to seize these two strategic points, achieve a breakthrough in the center, sever the link between the 5th Army and the 19th Route Army, and then defeat them individually. At dawn on February the 20th, the Japanese had dispatched over 10 aircraft from reconnaissance and bombing missions over the Maohang area. Naval artillery and heavy army cannons heavily shelled the Maohang positions. Simultaneously, Japanese artillery bombarded the Yunzaobang area in an effort to force a crossing and facilitate the Maohang offensive. By 9 a.m., part of the Japanese forces advanced towards Xiaoqiang Temple and the Maijiaojai position, immediately conducting a fire search over the Chinese troops' positions. At noon, 3,000 Japanese soldiers launched an attack against their forces. The officers and soldiers of the 527th Regiment, defending the Maijiaojai and Juyuandun positions, mounted a counterattack, marking the beginning of the Battle of Maohang. After 3 hours of intense fighting, the Japanese suffered significant casualties and they were unable to continue. They had to retreat to the original positions. Following this, over 2,000 Japanese troops attacked the Xiaoqiang Temple and the Jinqiaodong positions. The officers and soldiers of the 523rd Regiment, taking cover in the trenches, launched a counterattack, successfully repelling the Japanese forces. As dusk fell, the Japanese infantry halted their assaults, but naval and land artillery continued to bombard the positions in an attempt to weaken the defenses and personnel for a renewed attack on the following day. On the 21st, Japanese artillery relentlessly shelled the positions of the 88th Division of the 5th Army in Maohang. Following this, thousands of Japanese infantry launched an assault on the Yanjiaojai and Maohang town front. As the Japanese forces advanced, the officers and soldiers of the 523rd and 524th Regiments bravely counterattacked and successfully repelled them. However, a significant number of enemy troops coordinated a comprehensive assault on Maijiaojai, Juyuandun, Changmao, and Yanjiaojai lines south of Maohang. The 523rd, 524th, and 527th Regiments engaged in intense combat with the enemy, particularly at Juyuandun, near Maijiaojai, and Shushu, where the fighting was especially fierce. After a day of conflict, the enemy was temporarily pushed back. On February the 22nd, the Japanese 9th Division launched a full-scale attack on the Maohang position held by the 88th Division of the 5th Army. Throughout the day, aircraft bombed the Chinese defenders and thousands of artillery shells were fired at them. However, under the direct command of Zhang Qizhong, the enemy faced a devastating defeat due to the coordinated three-pronged assault by the Sun Yuanliang Brigade and the Song Shilian Brigade and the 61st Division of the 19th Route Army. The Maohang position was ultimately saved from peril, inflicting heavy casualties on the elite forces of the Japanese 9th Division and the Kurumi Mixed Brigade. This victory became known as the Maohang victory for the Chinese. In the days that followed, the enemy continued their bombardment and attacks were consistently repelled by the defenders. The Japanese army suffered significant losses, shifting from an all-out offensive to a more focused approach before ultimately halting their attacks. By the 25th, Ueda's overall offensive strategy had failed. On the 24th, the Japanese army decided to escalate the conflict once more, transferring the 11th and 14th Divisions from Japan to join the Shanghai Expeditionary Force, which included troops already engaged in the war. At that time, the flagship of the Japanese Navy's Third Fleet, the Izumo, sustained damage from a bombing raid carried out by a suicide squad of the 19th Route Army, which sent shockwaves throughout all of Japan. Additionally, the large troop presence made a quick resolution to the war impossible. Consequently, on the 23rd, the Japanese cabinet decided to promptly reinforce the army. The General Staff then established the Shanghai Expeditionary Army Command, appointing General Shirakawa Yoshinori, the former Minister of War, in the Tanaka cabinet to replace Ueda. They dispatched the 11th Division, led by Lieutenant General Atsutaro Asuto, the 14th Division, led by Lieutenant General Naoki Matsuki, and over 100 additional aircraft to China to initiate a larger offensive. After several reinforcements, the Japanese forces in Shanghai, under Shirakawa's command, grew to over 90,000 troops, supported by 80 warships and 300 aircraft, significantly enhancing their combat effectiveness. In contrast, the total strength of the Chinese defenders was less than 50,000, with inadequate equipment. After a month of intense fighting, the Chinese forces had suffered heavy losses, leaving their river defenses in the Taitang-Lehe area vulnerable. Learning from the failures of the previous three commanders' frontal assaults, Shirakawa opted to land at Le He to flank the Songhu defenders. He directed the 9th Division and other units to launch a direct attack on Songhu and Shanghai while using the 3rd Fleet to escort the 11th Division into the Yangtze River estuary. They executed surprise landings at Le He-ko, Yanglin-ko, and Chiao-ko, quickly outflanking the defenders. On March the 1st, the Japanese forces initiated attacks in Naobei, Jiangwang, and Maohang, employing heavy artillery, field guns, and aircraft for continuous bombardment. The infantry capitalized on this to engage in close-quarters combat, resulting in heavy casualties on both sides. Meanwhile, Shirakawa secretly instructed the 11th Division to exploit the weakness of the Chinese troops in the Le He area, forcibly landing at Chiao-ko, Yanglin-ko, and Libin-ko, ultimately seeing the capture of Le He. The fall of Le He posed a significant threat to the flank and rear of the Chinese army, compelling the entire force to retreat to a second line of defense. This was known as the Jiaoding-Hongdu line. They did so by the evening of March the 1st. By the 2nd, the Japanese army had finally seized Shanghai, and by March the 3rd, they occupied Zhenru and Nanjiang, subsequently announcing a ceasefire. Now, while we've been focusing on the Japanese and Chinese perspectives in this, the international community was also heavily involved in the background. After the outbreak of hostilities, the British and American consuls in Shanghai offered to mediate. However, despite a ceasefire being implemented, the hostilities continued. So on February the 2nd, Britain and America, France, Italy, and Germany sent a notice to China and Japan stating this: proposing to stop the conflict. 1. Both sides immediately stop all violent acts according to the following conditions. 2. There will be no mobilization or preparation for any hostile acts between the two countries. 3. The Chinese and Japanese combatants in Shanghai will withdraw from the contact points. 4. A neutral zone will be established to separate the combatants of both sides to protect the public concession. The area will be garrisoned by a neutral military and police, and various methods will be formulated by the Conciliar Corps. 5. Once the two countries accept the treaty, they will not make any demands or reservations in advance, but will quickly negotiate with the assistance of neutral observers or participants in accordance with the spirit of the Kellogg War Pact and the December 9th League of Nations resolution to resolve all outstanding issues. Nanjing generally accepted the terms, but Japan instead proposed a non-military zone be established 20 miles around the major ports of Shanghai, Hankou, Tianjin, Qingdao, and Guangzhou, as a sort of counter-proposal. Meanwhile, at the League of Nations, Hu Yuqing was drawing attention to the Shanghai incident, obviously linking it to the Manchurian incident, and advocated for Article 10 of the League of Nations Charter, which was in regards to respecting the territorial integrity and political independence of League nations. The League of Nations agreed and organized a committee to investigate the Shanghai incident. On February the 4th, Chiang Kai-shek would write in his diary, "As long as we do not lose our national sovereignty and territory, and the Japanese invaders do not push forward unacceptable conditions, we can take advantage of the opportunity of British and American intervention to negotiate with them. We cannot take a tough stance when other countries intervene, which will lead to adverse effects." By late February, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Stimson warned Japan for a second time that the Nine-Power Treaty and other treaties had to be maintained. Then on the 23rd, he sent a letter reiterating the Nine-Power Treaty and Kellogg War Pact to the League of Nations in regards to the Shanghai situation. On the 29th, a 4-point plan for mediating the Shanghai incident was adopted at the League of Nations. The objective was to swiftly establish a local ceasefire agreement with the assistance of civil and military officials from various countries present in Shanghai. Following this, a roundtable meeting was to be convened with representatives from the nations with vested interests in Shanghai to discuss the security measures for the international settlement, the French concession, and the local residents, as well as to address other issues. Subsequently, representatives from Britain, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain, amongst other nations, unanimously supported the plan, with Chinese representatives Yang Huqing and Japanese representatives such as Seido Nagatake also indicating their general agreement in principle. However, on March the 2nd, the situation escalated when the Japanese army compelled the Chinese forces to retreat to their second line of defense. The Japanese side adopted a much more aggressive stance, presenting 4 stringent conditions and insisting that the Chinese army withdraw first before halting their attacks. The Japanese forces were only willing to withdraw to the Shanghai and Wusong areas, and they refused to do so under the supervision of neutral countries, which the Chinese government firmly rejected. On March the 3rd, the Japanese army launched another offensive, And on that same day, Stimson summoned the Japanese ambassador to the United States, Idabuchi, condemning Japan for accepting the League of Nations resolution on February 29th while simultaneously escalating military operations. On March 3rd, a ceasefire came into effect as a formal meeting was held at the British consulate. The Chinese delegation was led by Guo Taichi, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, along with military representatives Dai Jie, Huang Chang, and 7 others. The Japanese delegation included Shigemitsu Mamoru, Minister to China, and the military representatives of Ueda, Tashiro, and 9 others. Officials from Britain, the United States, and France, and some other nations also participated in the meeting. During the negotiations, numerous contentious issues arose, particularly regarding the timing and the location of the Japanese Army's withdrawal. It would take until May the 5th for an armistice agreement to actually be signed. The agreement designated Shanghai as a demilitarized zone, prohibiting China from stationing troops in the areas around Shanghai, Suzhou, and Kunshan, while permitting a limited number of Japanese units to remain in the city. China was permitted to maintain only a small police force within Shanghai. Now, according to Chinese war reports, a total of 10,254 Japanese soldiers were either killed or wounded in the First Battle of Shanghai. According to Japanese war reports, a total of 3,091 Japanese soldiers were killed or wounded in the invasion. To be more specific, 620 Japanese soldiers were killed and 1,622 were wounded in the army, 149 Japanese soldiers were killed and 700 were wounded in the navy. Another Chinese report stated the 19th Road Army and the 5th Army suffered a total of 14,104 casualties, with 4,274 being killed and 9,830 wounded. Among them, the 19th Road Army suffered 8,792 casualties, while the 5th Army suffered 5,312. Shanghai residents faced bombardments continuously from Japanese aircraft and artillery, resulting in over 6,080 fatalities, more than 2,000 injuries, and 10,400 missing persons, with property losses totaling 1.6 billion yuan. At the offset of the war, the Japanese military intentionally targeted cultural institutions in Shanghai, such as the commercial press and the Oriental Library, leading to the total destruction of the commercial press and the oldest and largest publishing house in China. The Oriental Library, which housed millions of volumes, including over 100,000 rare ancient texts going back to the Song and Yuan dynasties, and the Sikui Chuanshi, compiled during the Chuanlong era of the Qing dynasty, were devastated by artillery fire and then looted by Japanese forces. Reports from that time indicated that the Japanese army used trucks to transport the remaining books for over 7 consecutive days. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube. You can also produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found over at YouTube, and Echoes of War, found on major podcast platforms. Over on both, I just released a 2-hour-long episode covering the naval battle of Guadalcanal. And if you'd like to further support me, please check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Thus, what became known as the First Battle of Shanghai had come to a not-so-swift end. Was its resolution a victory for the League of Nations? Or was it just another indicator that the League of Nations was nothing more than promises on a piece of paper? One man took notice of the Manchurian and Shanghai incidents, and he would soon bring Europe into a global war.